The French Revolution was one of the most transformative periods in history, not just for France but for the entire world. It marked a profound shift in the political, social, and economic landscape of the time. Before the Revolution, France was under the rule of the Bourbon monarchy, led by King Louis XVI. France was an absolute monarchy, meaning that the king held all political power, and there were no significant limits to his authority. However, this system of government, known as the Ancien Regime, was beginning to show signs of strain, as the country faced numerous challenges, both domestically and abroad. The people of France were unhappy with the existing order, which they saw as unfair and deeply flawed. There were widespread grievances, particularly among the common people, who were burdened with high taxes, food shortages, and an overall lack of political representation. The causes of the French Revolution were complex, and they didn't arise overnight. One of the most significant contributing factors was the financial crisis that France was facing. The government was deeply in debt, primarily due to its involvement in costly wars, such as the 7 Years' War and, more recently, its support for the American Revolution. These wars drained the royal treasury and led to increased taxation. However, the taxes were not equally distributed, and the common people, or the Third Estate, carried the heaviest burden. Meanwhile, the nobility and the clergy, who made up the First and Second Estates, enjoyed numerous privileges, including exemption from many taxes. This inequality created widespread resentment and anger among the lower classes. Another factor that contributed to the revolution was the social structure of French society. France was a highly stratified society, with the vast majority of people living in poverty or near poverty, while a small elite held most of the wealth and power. The Third Estate, which represented peasants, workers, and the bourgeoisie, the middle class, was by far the largest group, yet it had little political influence. The nobility and clergy, who made up only a small portion of the population, held all the political power. This created a sense of injustice, and many people began to question the legitimacy of a system that allowed a tiny minority to dominate the majority. Economic hardship also played a critical role in fueling the revolution. France experienced a series of crop failures in the late 1780s, leading to food shortages and skyrocketing bread prices. Bread was the staple food for most people, and when prices rose, it had a devastating impact on the poor. Many families were already struggling to make ends meet, and the rising cost of food pushed them into even deeper poverty. Protests over food prices and general economic hardship became common, and the frustration with the ruling classes grew. At the same time, Enlightenment ideas were beginning to spread throughout Europe, including in France. Enlightenment thinkers, such as John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire, challenged traditional notions of absolute monarchy and the divine right of kings. They argued for the importance of individual rights, democracy, and equality before the law. These ideas found a receptive audience among the educated classes, including many in the bourgeoisie, who began to demand greater political representation and rights. All these factors, the financial crisis, social inequality, economic hardship, and the spread of Enlightenment ideas, created a perfect storm that set the stage for the French Revolution. By 1789, the situation in France had become untenable. The country was on the brink of collapse, and the people could no longer tolerate the existing system. The revolution was about to begin, and it would change the course of history forever. It would lead to the downfall of the monarchy, the rise of radical political ideas, and the establishment of a new order that would shape France and the world for generations to come. The social structure of France before the revolution was deeply entrenched in inequality and privilege, contributing significantly to the unrest that eventually led to the outbreak of the French Revolution. Society in France was divided into three estates: the First Estate, consisting of the clergy, the Second Estate, comprising the nobility, and the Third Estate, which included everyone else, from peasants to the bourgeoisie, or middle class. This division created a rigid social hierarchy, where power, wealth, and privilege were disproportionately concentrated in the hands of a small elite. The First Estate was made up of the clergy, who were highly influential in both spiritual and political matters. Despite representing a small portion of the population, the clergy had extensive privileges, including exemption from taxes, a large portion of the land, and the ability to collect tithes from the people. The clergy played a significant role in maintaining the status quo, supporting the monarchy, and promoting religious values that aligned with the political establishment. While many clergy members lived in luxury, there were also lower-ranking priests who lived in poverty, but overall, the First Estate wielded substantial power. The Second Estate consisted of the nobility, which, like the clergy, enjoyed numerous privileges. The nobility were exempt from most taxes and held significant land, which provided them with wealth and influence. They were also given special legal rights, such as the ability to hold positions in the military or government. Nobles often lived in grandeur, enjoying lavish lifestyles funded by the rents and taxes paid by the peasants who worked their lands. The nobility's close relationship with the monarchy ensured that they remained an influential force in French politics. The Third Estate, by far the largest group, included peasants, urban workers, and the bourgeoisie. The peasants were the backbone of French society, working the land and producing the food that sustained the nation. However, they were burdened with heavy taxes and feudal obligations to the nobility. Many peasants lived in poverty, working long hours in difficult conditions while struggling to meet the demands placed on them by the landowners. In addition to the peasants, the Third Estate included urban workers, such as artisans, merchants, and laborers, who faced their own set of challenges, including poor working conditions and low wages. Within the Third Estate, the bourgeoisie stood out as a growing and increasingly powerful group. The bourgeoisie were typically well-educated, wealthy, and involved in trade or business. They did not, however, enjoy the privileges of the nobility or the clergy. Many bourgeoisie members resented their lack of political power, as they had the wealth but not the status that came with being part of the nobility. They were influenced by Enlightenment ideals that emphasized individual rights, equality, and the importance of reason. As a result, they began to demand greater representation in a political system that reflected their interests. The inequality of this social structure was a key factor in the growing dissatisfaction that led to the revolution. The privileges enjoyed by the clergy and nobility, combined with the heavy burdens placed on the Third Estate, created widespread resentment. This sense of injustice was exacerbated by the fact that the majority of the population, particularly in the Third Estate, had little to no political power or voice in the decisions that affected their lives. The social system of France was not just a backdrop to the revolution. It was the very system that many believed needed to be overthrown if true change was to occur. The French Revolution would not just change the political landscape of France, it would also dismantle the old social order and attempt to create a new society based on the principles of equality and justice. The financial crisis in France leading up to the French Revolution was one of the most significant factors contributing to the eruption of the revolution. The kingdom was financially insolvent, and the government was deeply in debt, which placed immense pressure on the already strained economy and society. France's fiscal troubles were the result of years of excessive spending, including costly wars and lavish royal expenditures, that far outpaced the nation's ability to generate revenue. A major contributor to the financial crisis was France's involvement in foreign conflicts, most notably the Seven Years' War, 1756 to 1763, and the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. The French government provided significant financial and military support to the American colonies in their fight against Great Britain, which, while strategically motivated, placed a heavy strain on France's finances. By the end of the war, France was deeply in debt, and the national treasury was drained. The cost of these wars was exacerbated by the mismanagement and inefficiency of the royal court, which continued to fund extravagant projects and maintain a lavish lifestyle at a time when the country could not afford such luxuries. King Louis XVI and his advisors did little to address the issue of France's mounting debt, and the tax system, which was highly regressive, only worsened the financial crisis. In France, the burden of taxation fell disproportionately on the Third Estate, the common people, who were already struggling with high food prices and poor living conditions. The nobility and the clergy, who represented the First and Second Estates, were largely exempt from taxation, and this inequality fueled growing anger among the population. The common people, who made up the vast majority of the population, were left to carry the weight of the nation's debt. The situation worsened when France's King Louis XVI attempted to reform the tax system and address the fiscal crisis by imposing new taxes on the nobility. However, the privileged classes resisted these reforms, and the king's attempts to implement them were blocked, leading to further economic instability. At the same time, widespread crop failures in the late 1780s exacerbated the economic crisis. Poor harvests resulted in food shortages, particularly wheat, which led to an increase in bread prices. Bread was the staple food of the French diet, and when its price skyrocketed, it caused immense hardship for the common people. Famine was widespread, and many people were unable to afford enough food to sustain themselves. The desperation of the French populace grew as they saw the wealth and luxury of the aristocracy, who remained unaffected by the food shortages. Protests and uprisings over food prices became more frequent, and the resentment toward the ruling classes deepened. The combination of financial mismanagement, excessive spending, and social inequality created a volatile situation in France. The people, particularly in the Third Estate, were fed up with the monarchy's inability to address the country's mounting problems. There was a growing sense that the old system of governance, with its entrenched privileges for the nobility and clergy, was unsustainable. The financial crisis not only sparked protests but also laid the groundwork for a much larger upheaval. The collapse of the French economy was one of the key catalysts for the French Revolution, as it pushed the population to demand reform, equality, and a more just society. The failure of the monarchy to address these issues ultimately set the stage for the radical changes that would follow. The revolution would not just be a response to economic problems, but also a response to the deep-rooted injustices within the social and political systems of France. In 1789, the French monarchy, under King Louis XVI, convened the Estates General, a meeting of representatives from the three estates, clergy, nobility, and the common people, in an attempt to address the nation's severe financial crisis. This was the first meeting of the Estates General in over 170 years, and it was initially seen as a way to address the country's problems. The Estates General was supposed to bring together the representatives of all three estates to discuss the financial troubles of the monarchy and potentially introduce reforms. However, the event did not go as planned, and its outcome would become a critical turning point in the French Revolution. The first and second estates, made up of the clergy and the nobility, each had a single vote in the Estates General. This system gave them a significant advantage because they were the privileged classes, and their votes often outweighed the interests of the Third Estate, which represented the majority of the population. The Third Estate, which was made up of commoners, peasants, workers, and the bourgeoisie, was the largest estate, but it was treated unfairly in this system. Despite their numbers, they had the same voting power as the clergy and the nobility, who represented far fewer people. This unequal representation was one of the root causes of dissatisfaction among the common people. As the meeting of the Estates General progressed, it became increasingly clear that the Third Estate was not going to accept this system of inequality. Representatives of the Third Estate, led by figures like Abbé Sieyès, began to demand reforms. They called for a more equitable representation, including the idea that votes should be based on headcount rather than by estate. The privileged estates, however, resisted these changes, and the tension between the Third Estate and the other two estates grew. On June 17, 1789, in a dramatic move, the Third Estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly, declaring that it represented the true will of the French people. This decision was an open challenge to the authority of King Louis XVI and the existing political order. The representatives of the Third Estate insisted that they would not disband until a new constitution had been written, one that would reflect the interests of the common people and establish a system based on representation rather than privilege. This move was revolutionary in nature and signaled that the old order in France was coming to an end. Shortly thereafter, the National Assembly was locked out of their usual meeting place, which they saw as an attempt by the monarchy to prevent their work. In response, they took an oath in an indoor tennis court, famously known as the Tennis Court Oath, pledging not to disband until a new constitution was created. This oath was a symbolic moment in the revolution, as it showed the resolve of the National Assembly to challenge the authority of the king and demand change. The people of Paris, including workers and the bourgeoisie, rallied around this new political force, and the National Assembly began to gain widespread support. King Louis XVI, caught off guard by these developments, initially hesitated. However, he eventually gave in to pressure and allowed the National Assembly to continue meeting. By this time, however, the revolution had gained momentum, and there was no turning back. The National Assembly's actions set the stage for the radical changes that would follow in the coming months. The political struggle between the monarchy and the National Assembly would escalate, leading to the fall of the Bastille, the abolition of feudalism, and the eventual rise of a republic. The events that began with the Estates General in 1789 marked the beginning of a new political era in France, one that would fundamentally reshape the country and influence the future of the world. On July 14, 1789, the storming of the Bastille became one of the most iconic events in the history of the French Revolution. The Bastille was a fortress prison in Paris, which had become a symbol of the tyranny of the Bourbon monarchy and its oppressive rule. While it was not a significant military stronghold at the time, it had long represented royal authority and the king's ability to imprison individuals without trial. For the people of Paris, the Bastille had become a symbol of all that was wrong with the old regime. The storming of the Bastille was not an isolated event but the culmination of rising tensions that had been brewing for months. The political climate in Paris had become increasingly volatile after the establishment of the National Assembly and the Tennis Court Oath. Rumors of a royal coup and the suppression of the National Assembly were spreading throughout the city, and the people of Paris, particularly the working class, feared that King Louis XVI and his allies were plotting to crush the revolution. In response, they began to take matters into their own hands. The event began with the French populace attempting to secure weapons and gunpowder. Paris was a city in turmoil, and many feared that the king's soldiers would be sent to suppress the revolutionaries. The people of Paris, especially the workers and craftsmen of the city, began to assemble in large numbers and march toward the Bastille. They had heard that gunpowder was stored in the fortress, and they were determined to seize it to defend themselves from potential attack. On the morning of July 14, thousands of Parisians gathered outside the Bastille, demanding that the governor of the prison, Bernard-René Delaunay, surrender the fortress and provide them with the arms and gunpowder they believed were stored inside. Negotiations between the revolutionaries and the garrison of the Bastille quickly broke down, and soon the situation turned violent. The crowd began to storm the gates of the prison, and gunfire was exchanged between the attackers and the defenders. After several hours of fighting, the revolutionaries managed to breach the Bastille's defenses, and the prison was taken. The fall of the Bastille was a symbolic victory for the revolutionaries, marking the beginning of the end for the old order in France. The event was not just about the physical capture of the prison but also about the defeat of royal authority. It demonstrated that the people, particularly in Paris, were willing to take extreme measures to ensure that the revolution succeeded. The storming of the Bastille sent a powerful message to King Louis XVI and the rest of the French aristocracy. The old regime was no longer safe, and the people were demanding change. In the aftermath of the Bastille's fall, the revolutionaries did not just capture arms and gunpowder. They also liberated prisoners who had been held without trial. Although the number of prisoners in the Bastille was relatively small, there were only 7 prisoners at the time. It became a symbol of the king's power to imprison those who opposed him, and their release was seen as an important victory for personal freedoms. The storming of the Bastille also marked a turning point in the French Revolution. Following the fall of the fortress, the National Assembly was emboldened and gained increased support from the people. The event also galvanized revolutionary sentiment throughout France, leading to uprisings and protests in other cities. The king, in the face of this growing rebellion, was forced to acknowledge the power of the revolutionaries. In the following weeks, the monarchy's authority continued to erode, and the revolution gained strength. The storming of the Bastille, while initially an act of desperation, became a symbol of the power of the people and their ability to challenge the existing political order. To this day, the storming of the Bastille is celebrated every year on Bastille Day, July 14, as a symbol of liberty and the enduring spirit of the French Revolution. It represents the overthrow of tyranny and the fight for freedom, equality, and fraternity, ideals that would become central to the revolution and shape the future of France and the world. The fall of the Bastille was not just a moment in history, it was the beginning of a new era, one where the power of the monarchy would be replaced by the will of the people. On August 26, 1789, the National Assembly of France made one of the most significant proclamations in history with the adoption of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This document outlined the fundamental principles of the revolution and served as a cornerstone for the new political system that was emerging in France. The Declaration was inspired by Enlightenment ideals, particularly those espoused by philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke, who championed individual rights, equality, and the idea of popular sovereignty. It articulated the basic rights that every citizen should enjoy, regardless of their status, and laid the foundation for a more egalitarian society. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen asserted that all men are born free and equal in rights. These rights included liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. The Declaration declared that sovereignty resided in the people, not in the monarchy, and that government existed to protect the natural rights of individuals. It also emphasized the importance of the rule of law and stated that laws should be created by the will of the people, ensuring that no one, not even the king, was above the law. One of the most radical aspects of the Declaration was its assertion of equality before the law. In the past, French society had been marked by a rigid social hierarchy, with different rights and privileges granted to the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. The Declaration sought to dismantle this system by asserting that all men, regardless of their social status, were equal in the eyes of the law. This was a direct challenge to the traditional privileges enjoyed by the aristocracy and the clergy, who had long been exempt from many laws and taxes. The Declaration also enshrined the right to freedom of speech, press, and assembly, which were essential for a democratic society. These rights allowed the people to voice their opinions, challenge the government, and participate in the political process. The National Assembly recognized that these freedoms were vital for the development of a republic where power was derived from the people, not from a monarch or aristocracy. While the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was a groundbreaking document that promised a new era of liberty and equality in France, its implementation was far from straightforward. The Declaration was not universally accepted, and the revolutionaries faced numerous challenges in trying to put its principles into practice. The king and his supporters, who were resistant to the changes brought about by the revolution, remained opposed to many of the ideas in the Declaration. The aristocracy, too, feared the loss of their privileges and power, and they began to conspire against the revolutionaries. Nevertheless, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen became a powerful symbol of the revolution and its ideals. It was later incorporated into the French Constitution of 1791 and influenced the development of democratic movements around the world. Its principles would continue to resonate throughout the French Revolution, providing a framework for the radical changes that followed. The Declaration's assertion of equality, liberty, and popular sovereignty would shape the course of history, not only in France but across the globe, as it inspired other nations to pursue similar ideals of human rights and democracy. While the French Revolution would go on to face many challenges, and its course would be marked by periods of violence and instability, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen remained a fundamental document that shaped the future of France. It set the stage for the establishment of the First French Republic and the eventual abolition of the monarchy. It also laid the groundwork for the development of modern concepts of human rights, equality, and democracy, influencing movements for freedom and justice worldwide. The Declaration's impact was profound, and its legacy continues to be felt in the fight for human rights and democratic governance today. As the French Revolution progressed, the revolutionary spirit in France began to grow more radical, particularly with the rise of the Jacobins, a political club made up of revolutionary leaders who favored more extreme measures to ensure the success of the revolution. Among the most notable figures of the Jacobins was Maximilien Robespierre, who would become one of the central figures in what is known as the Reign of Terror, a period marked by extreme political repression and widespread executions of perceived enemies of the revolution. The Jacobins believed that in order to protect the revolution and the newly established republic from both internal and external threats, drastic measures were necessary. France was embroiled in war with several European monarchies, including Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain, and the revolutionaries feared that foreign intervention could restore the monarchy. At the same time, there were many within France who opposed the revolution, including royalists, aristocrats, and even former revolutionaries who had become disillusioned with the more radical aspects of the movement. Faced with these threats, the Jacobins argued that the survival of the revolution required the suppression of counter-revolutionary elements. In September 1793, the Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre and other prominent Jacobins, took control of the French government. The committee was given broad powers to oversee the defense of the revolution and to root out enemies within France. The government began to implement policies of mass executions, particularly through the use of the guillotine, a symbol of the revolution's harsh new approach to justice. The Reign of Terror, which lasted from September 1793 to July 1794, saw thousands of people, including nobles, clergy, and political opponents, executed on charges of treason, conspiracy, or counter-revolutionary activities. The guillotine became a symbol of the period, and it was used to execute not just the aristocracy but also members of the bourgeoisie and even fellow revolutionaries who were seen as threats to the revolution. The fear and paranoia that gripped France during the Reign of Terror were amplified by the constant threats to the revolution's survival. The Committee of Public Safety, under Robespierre's leadership, justified the mass executions as a necessary measure to protect the Republic. Robespierre himself became more and more uncompromising, calling for the execution of anyone who was suspected of being an enemy of the revolution, regardless of their status or former allegiance. During this time, the revolutionary government also imposed strict controls on the economy, including price controls on essential goods, and pursued policies aimed at de-Christianizing France, such as the closure of churches and the promotion of secularism. Despite the initial success of the Reign of Terror in securing the revolution, it soon became clear that the extreme measures were alienating many people in France. The violence and repression led to widespread fear and resentment, even among those who had once supported the revolution. Robespierre's increasingly radical rhetoric and the growing number of executions created a climate of terror, where no one was safe from the government's scrutiny. Ultimately, the Reign of Terror came to an end in July 1794, when Robespierre himself was arrested and executed by the very system he had created. This event, known as the Thermidorian reaction, marked a turning point in the revolution, as the more moderate forces regained control and began to dismantle the policies of the Jacobins. While the Reign of Terror was a period of intense violence and political purges, it also had lasting effects on the trajectory of the revolution. The mass executions and the radical changes brought about by the Jacobins would leave a deep mark on French society and politics. The Reign of Terror was a reminder of the dangers of unchecked revolutionary zeal and the potential for power to be abused in the name of protecting the revolution. The events of this period would shape the future of the French Revolution, paving the way for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the eventual end of the First Republic. Despite the excesses of the Reign of Terror, it also served to consolidate the revolutionary gains and provided a sense of unity among the people of France, who were determined to protect the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The fall of King Louis XVI was a pivotal moment in the French Revolution, symbolizing the definitive end of the French monarchy and the establishment of the French Republic. On June 20, 1791, King Louis XVI and his family attempted to flee Paris in what became known as the Flight to Varennes. The royal family's escape was motivated by growing fears for their safety and the increasing pressure from revolutionaries to implement reforms. However, their flight was unsuccessful and only worsened their relationship with the people. They were captured in Varennes, a small town in northeastern France, and brought back to Paris. This attempt to flee was seen by many as an act of betrayal, as it suggested that the king was not committed to the revolution and was willing to abandon the people to protect his own interests. The failed flight shattered the king's credibility and led to widespread calls for his abdication. The monarchy, which had once been seen as the legitimate authority in France, was now viewed with suspicion and disdain by many revolutionaries. The king's actions had made it clear that he was not willing to embrace the changes demanded by the revolution, and his flight further convinced the revolutionaries that he could not be trusted to lead the country. In response, the National Assembly declared the king to be an enemy of the revolution, and a few months later, on September 20, 1792, the monarchy was formally abolished. The trial of King Louis XVI was a dramatic and highly charged event. The National Convention, which had replaced the National Assembly, put the king on trial for charges of treason, conspiracy, and attempting to undermine the revolution. The trial was conducted with great public attention, and the evidence presented against the king was damning. His attempt to flee the country, along with his secret correspondence with foreign monarchs, was seen as evidence of his desire to restore the monarchy and undermine the revolution. Despite his defense, in which he denied the charges and maintained his innocence, Louis XVI was found guilty of treason by the National Convention. The decision to execute the king was not unanimous, and it sparked significant debate among revolutionaries. Some believed that executing Louis XVI was necessary to secure the revolution and send a clear message to the enemies of the Republic. Others, however, were hesitant, fearing that the king's execution could lead to greater instability and conflict. In the end, the majority of the National Convention voted in favor of the king's death, and on January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine in the Place de la Révolution in Paris. The execution of Louis XVI marked the official end of the monarchy in France and the birth of the First French Republic. The event had far-reaching consequences, both for France and for Europe as a whole. In France, the execution deepened the divisions between the revolutionaries and the royalists, and it further radicalized the revolution. For many of the revolutionaries, the king's death was a necessary step to ensure the survival of the republic and the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. However, for royalists and many conservatives, the execution was a tragic and shocking act that marked the point of no return for France's political future. The execution of Louis XVI also had significant international repercussions. Monarchies across Europe were horrified by the event, and many saw it as a direct challenge to their own authority. The execution of a king by the people sent shockwaves throughout Europe, and it was seen as a dangerous precedent. The event led to a coalition of European monarchies, including Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain, who sought to crush the French Revolution and restore the monarchy. This led to a series of wars between revolutionary France and the monarchies of Europe, known as the French Revolutionary Wars, which would shape the future of Europe for years to come. The death of Louis XVI did not end the struggles within France. In fact, it deepened the crisis. The execution left the revolutionaries in a precarious position, as they faced both internal divisions and external threats. However, it also marked the triumph of republican ideals over monarchical power, and it set the stage for the radical changes that would follow. The fall of the monarchy and the execution of the king marked the beginning of a new political era in France, one in which the people, rather than the monarchy, would hold the power. It was an event that would reverberate through history, influencing future revolutions and the development of modern political systems. The Thermidorian reaction marked the end of the Reign of Terror and a shift towards a more moderate phase of the French Revolution. It began in July 1794, following the fall of Maximilien Robespierre, one of the most influential figures of the revolution. Robespierre had been the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, and during his time in power, he oversaw the execution of thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution. However, by the summer of 1794, Robespierre had become increasingly paranoid, making a series of radical moves that alienated both his allies and his enemies. His speeches calling for more executions and purges of the revolution's enemies led to growing dissatisfaction among other members of the National Convention, which eventually led to his downfall. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre was arrested and, the following day, executed by guillotine, along with many of his supporters. This event, known as the Fall of Robespierre, marked the beginning of the Thermidorian reaction, a period of political moderation that sought to reverse many of the radical policies of the Reign of Terror. The Thermidorian reaction was characterized by a relaxation of government control, a reduction in the number of executions, and a general shift towards more conservative policies. In the aftermath of Robespierre's execution, the National Convention sought to distance itself from the extreme violence of the Reign of Terror. The revolutionary government that had been so focused on purging counter-revolutionaries and maintaining a strict, centralized power structure began to loosen its grip on French society. The law of suspects, which had allowed for the arrest of virtually anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution, was repealed, and the Committee of Public Safety's powers were significantly reduced. The revolutionary tribunals, which had conducted mass executions during the Terror, were also weakened, and executions became much less frequent. The political climate during the Thermidorian reaction was characterized by a struggle for power between moderate revolutionaries and more conservative factions. The moderates sought to stabilize France after the upheaval of the Terror, while conservatives were wary of the continued influence of radical revolutionary ideals. The Thermidorian government took steps to restore the economy, which had been ravaged by years of war, political instability, and radical economic policies. One of the most important measures was the gradual reintroduction of free market practices. This shift away from the strict price controls and rationing of the earlier years of the revolution led to inflation and rising food prices, which created economic instability and discontent among the lower classes. The reaction against the extremes of the Reign of Terror was also felt socially. The revolutionaries who had once championed radical secularism and de-Christianization began to reconsider some of their earlier measures. In the wake of Robespierre's fall, the government allowed the practice of religion to be restored, though with limitations. Churches that had been closed during the Terror were reopened, and some of the more extreme anti-religious policies were reversed. This return to a more moderate stance on religion was also part of the broader movement to restore social order and bring stability back to France. Despite the moderation brought about by the Thermidorian reaction, the period was still marked by political and social turmoil. The revolution was far from over, and France remained embroiled in wars with foreign monarchies. Additionally, the rise of the Directory, the five-member executive body that took power after the fall of Robespierre, was not without its own challenges. The Directory struggled with corruption, instability, and an increasingly disillusioned population. The political factions that had emerged during the revolution continued to vie for control, and many people were dissatisfied with the direction the country was taking. The legacy of the Thermidorian reaction was one of disillusionment and uncertainty, as France's revolutionary fervor gave way to the realization that the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity had not yet been fully realized. Ultimately, the Thermidorian reaction set the stage for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. By the late 1790s, the instability created by the revolution's various phases, combined with the military successes of Napoleon, allowed him to seize power and establish the Consulate, which marked the end of the revolution and the beginning of a new era in French history. The Thermidorian reaction, though important in moderating the radical excesses of the revolution, did little to stabilize France in the long term. It laid the groundwork for the eventual rise of a strong, centralized leader in Napoleon, whose rule would fundamentally alter the course of French and world history. The French Revolution had far-reaching consequences, not only within France but also throughout Europe and beyond. The overthrow of the monarchy and the subsequent rise of radical republicanism sent shockwaves across the continent, inspiring other revolutionary movements and challenging the old systems of monarchy and aristocracy. The revolution was a profound shift in the balance of power, not only in France but in how people viewed their relationship to authority and government. The abolition of the monarchy, the establishment of the First Republic, and the dissemination of revolutionary ideas created a new political landscape in which the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity gained widespread influence. Internally, the revolution led to the radical restructuring of French society. The National Assembly's reforms during the early years of the revolution, including the abolition of feudal privileges and the secularization of church property, altered the social fabric of the country. The revolutionaries dismantled the traditional hierarchy that had governed France for centuries and replaced it with a more egalitarian system, at least in theory. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted in 1789, enshrined the principles of individual rights and equality before the law, though the practical application of these ideals would remain a subject of intense debate and struggle for years to come. The fall of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic also marked the end of the centuries-old system of absolute monarchy in France. The French monarchy, which had been a symbol of divine right and unchallenged authority, was replaced by a republican government, albeit one that would undergo many transformations over the years. The French Republic, however, was constantly threatened by both internal and external enemies. The execution of King Louis XVI in 1793 and the subsequent radicalization of the revolution alienated much of the aristocracy and led to a series of royalist uprisings. At the same time, foreign monarchies, alarmed by the revolutionary changes in France, waged war against the new republic in an attempt to restore the monarchy and suppress the revolutionary ideals that were spreading throughout Europe. Externally, the French Revolution had a significant impact on the rest of Europe. The ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, and the abolition of the monarchy, inspired revolutionary movements in other countries. In particular, the French Revolution influenced the Haitian Revolution, where enslaved people fought for their freedom and eventually overthrew the French colonial government. The revolutionary ideals also resonated with reformers and revolutionaries in other European nations, including Germany, Italy, and Spain, who sought to challenge the old monarchical orders and pursue democratic reforms. However, the revolution's spread of republican ideals was met with strong resistance from conservative monarchies. The reaction from other European powers was swift and severe. Countries like Austria, Prussia, and Britain, which were ruled by monarchs, feared that the revolution would inspire uprisings within their own borders. As a result, they formed coalitions to crush the French Revolution and restore the old order. The French Revolutionary Wars, which lasted from 1792 to 1802, were fought between France and a series of European coalitions. Despite facing significant military pressure, France's revolutionary government, bolstered by the ideals of the revolution, was able to defend itself and even expand its influence across Europe. The French Revolution also had a lasting impact on the development of modern political ideologies. The radical phases of the revolution, particularly during the Reign of Terror, led to the rise of political factions that would influence the course of history for generations. The Jacobins, led by figures like Robespierre, advocated for a strong centralized government and the use of terror to defend the revolution. On the other hand, the more moderate Girondins promoted a constitutional government and a less radical approach to change. These debates over the nature of government and the role of violence in achieving political goals laid the groundwork for the ideological battles that would define European politics in the 19th century. The revolution also gave rise to the concept of nationalism, as the French people came to see themselves as a unified nation, bound together by shared ideals and a common revolutionary purpose. This sense of nationalism would play a key role in the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who emerged as a military leader and political figure in the aftermath of the revolution. Napoleon would go on to lead France through a series of military victories, consolidating power and eventually declaring himself Emperor of the French in 1804. While Napoleon's rule marked the end of the French Revolution, the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity would continue to shape French and global political discourse for years to come. In the long run, the French Revolution had a profound and enduring impact on the world. It helped to usher in the modern era of democracy, individual rights, and the concept of popular sovereignty. While the revolution did not achieve all of its lofty ideals in the short term, it fundamentally changed the way people viewed their relationship to power and government, and it inspired generations of revolutionaries and reformers around the world. The revolution's legacy can be seen in the continued pursuit of democratic values, human rights, and the struggle for social justice, all of which remain central to global political movements today. The French Revolution left a lasting legacy on Europe and the world, not only by overthrowing the monarchy but also by inspiring movements for change that would shape the political landscape for generations. One of the most important consequences of the revolution was the spread of democratic ideals. While the revolution did not immediately lead to democracy, it established a framework for future democratic movements by asserting the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideals became the foundation for modern political thought and would inspire numerous revolutions, uprisings, and movements for reform in the years to come. In France, the revolution fundamentally altered the country's political and social structure. The abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of the First French Republic ended centuries of royal rule and feudalism. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen laid the groundwork for modern human rights and civil liberties. The revolutionary ideals influenced subsequent constitutions and laws that sought to establish equality before the law and the protection of individual rights. Although the path to a stable republic would be fraught with challenges and periods of political instability, the French Revolution ultimately created the conditions for the development of democratic institutions in France. The revolution also had profound effects on Europe as a whole. The French Revolution was a beacon of change that inspired similar movements in other European nations. In the early 19th century, the ideals of the revolution spread across Europe, influencing revolutions in countries such as Italy, Germany, and Spain. These movements, which sought to challenge the existing monarchical systems, were fueled by the desire for political change and the spread of Enlightenment ideals. The French Revolution demonstrated that it was possible for the people to overthrow an entrenched monarchy and create a new political system based on the principles of equality and popular sovereignty. However, the revolution also provoked backlash from conservative monarchies, particularly in countries like Austria, Prussia, and Britain. The French Revolution's radical ideas threatened the stability of these monarchies, leading to a series of coalitions that sought to suppress the revolution. The revolutionary wars that followed saw France at war with various European monarchies, as they attempted to restore the old order. The spread of revolutionary ideals, however, could not be easily suppressed. Even though many of the revolutions in Europe were ultimately crushed, the ideals of the French Revolution continued to inspire future generations of political activists and revolutionaries. One of the most significant outcomes of the revolution was the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. As the revolution turned increasingly radical, and the government became more unstable, Napoleon emerged as a military leader who promised stability and order. With his rise to power, Napoleon effectively ended the revolutionary period and established himself as ruler of France. In 1804, he declared himself Emperor of the French, consolidating power and instituting a new regime that would eventually spread across much of Europe. Although Napoleon's rule marked the end of the revolution, many of the principles of the revolution continued to shape his policies, including the introduction of the Napoleonic Code, which enshrined legal equality and property rights. Napoleon's reign also demonstrated the complex and often contradictory outcomes of the revolution. While he preserved many of the revolution's key principles, such as the abolition of feudalism and the promotion of legal equality, he also centralized power and created an authoritarian regime that contradicted the revolution's original ideals of liberty and popular sovereignty. Nevertheless, his rule helped to solidify many of the reforms that had been introduced during the revolution, and his conquests spread revolutionary ideals across Europe. Beyond Europe, the French Revolution had a significant impact on the rest of the world. The revolution's ideas inspired slave uprisings, particularly in the French colonies. The most notable of these was the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791 and resulted in the establishment of the first independent black republic in the world. The Haitian Revolution was directly influenced by the principles of the French Revolution, and it challenged the established colonial system, proving that the ideals of liberty and equality could be applied universally, even to enslaved populations. The success of the Haitian Revolution would go on to inspire other independence movements in the Americas and beyond. In the long term, the French Revolution also contributed to the development of modern political ideologies. The revolutionary period saw the rise of political factions, from the radical Jacobins to the more moderate Girondins, which laid the groundwork for future political movements. The French Revolution's emphasis on individual rights, the separation of powers, and the rule of law would influence the development of liberal and conservative ideologies throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Even in the present day, the revolution's ideas continue to shape debates about democracy, human rights, and the role of the state in people's lives. The legacy of the French Revolution is evident in the continued global struggle for democratic principles and human rights. The revolution marked the beginning of a new era in which the power of the monarchy was challenged, and the concept of popular sovereignty became central to political thought. While the revolution itself was marked by violence and political instability, its ideals endured and continue to resonate with movements for freedom, equality, and justice around the world. The French Revolution may have ended in the rise of Napoleon and the establishment of an empire, but its lasting impact on the development of modern democratic principles is undeniable. The French Revolution not only shaped the political and social landscape of France, but it also had profound and lasting effects on the broader European and global political order. The changes it brought about reverberated across borders, sparking movements for democracy, equality, and republicanism throughout Europe and the world. In the decades following the revolution, the ideas of liberty, fraternity, and equality became central to political discourse, influencing the formation of modern democratic nations and the decline of monarchies. Internally, the revolution radically transformed French society, though not without significant challenges. The monarchy was replaced with the First French Republic, marking the end of the centuries-old system of absolute royal rule. The political structure of France underwent numerous transformations, with new constitutions being drafted, and the nation's governance shifting from radical republicanism to more moderate forms of government. While the revolution initially promised a bright future of democracy and equality, the instability of the subsequent political regimes demonstrated the difficulty of translating revolutionary ideals into practical, stable governance. Following the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Reign of Terror, the Directory took control of France. However, the Directory itself faced its own set of challenges. It was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and internal conflict, unable to meet the growing demands of the people or resolve France's financial crisis. Meanwhile, foreign wars continued to drain the nation's resources, and the economy remained in turmoil. It was during this period of instability that Napoleon Bonaparte, a young military general, rose to prominence. Napoleon's rise marked the end of the revolutionary period and the beginning of a new chapter in French history. As the revolution's ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were absorbed into Napoleon's rule, the country saw some lasting reforms, such as the Napoleonic Code, which laid the foundation for modern legal systems by establishing principles of legal equality, property rights, and individual freedoms. However, Napoleon's decision to crown himself Emperor of the French in 1804 signaled a return to autocratic rule, contradicting the revolution's original ideals of republicanism and popular sovereignty. Despite this, Napoleon's impact on France and Europe was undeniable. He spread the revolutionary ideals across Europe through his conquests, bringing reforms to the territories he controlled, though often through force. His empire was short-lived, collapsing after his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, but the changes he instituted, such as the legal code and the abolition of feudal privileges, endured long after his fall. Napoleon's legacy would profoundly influence European history, as the revolutionary principles he spread across the continent would continue to inspire movements for national self-determination and democratic governance. Beyond Europe, the French Revolution had far-reaching effects on the colonies, especially in the Americas. The revolution inspired slave uprisings, most notably the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791 and led to the establishment of the first independent Black Republic. The Haitian Revolution was directly influenced by the principles of the French Revolution, especially the notions of liberty and equality. It became a powerful example of how revolutionary ideas could challenge entrenched systems of oppression and had a significant impact on the abolitionist movements in Europe and the Americas. The revolution also contributed to the rise of nationalism in Europe. As revolutionary ideals spread, people began to see themselves not just as subjects of monarchs but as members of a shared nation. Nationalism became a driving force in the 19th century, fueling movements for independence, unification, and democratic reforms in countries such as Italy, Germany, and Spain. The French Revolution, with its focus on popular sovereignty and the rights of citizens, gave rise to new ideas about the nation-state and the role of the people in shaping their political futures. The ripple effects of the French Revolution were felt in political and philosophical thought as well. Enlightenment thinkers had already laid the intellectual groundwork for the revolution, and the revolution itself helped bring their ideas to life. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, though not fully realized at the time, became central to future political movements. The revolution's legacy inspired numerous democratic revolutions throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, from the revolutions of 1848 in Europe to the American Civil Rights Movement. Despite the revolution's many contradictions and its tumultuous aftermath, its influence on the development of modern political systems is undeniable. It helped pave the way for the rise of democracy, human rights, and the concept of popular sovereignty in the modern era. While it may have led to periods of violence and political instability, the French Revolution fundamentally altered the course of history, challenging the old order and making way for the development of political systems based on the rule of law and the will of the people. In the end, the French Revolution was both a triumph and a tragedy, an upheaval that forever changed the world, but one that was also marked by violence, political purges, and internal strife. Its ideals continue to resonate today, as the struggle for democracy, equality, and human rights remains a central theme in global political movements. The French Revolution may have come to an end with the rise of Napoleon and the establishment of a new empire, but its legacy of radical change and its impact on modern political thought will continue to be felt for centuries to come. The French Revolution had profound and lasting consequences, not only in France but across Europe and the world, fundamentally reshaping political structures, social hierarchies, and international relations. Its radical ideals, liberty, equality, and fraternity, challenged existing systems of power and governance, spreading revolutionary fervor that ignited further uprisings and movements across the globe. Yet, as with any revolution, the aftermath was complex, and the revolution's legacy is a mixture of both triumphs and contradictions. Internally, the revolution led to the downfall of the monarchy, the establishment of the First French Republic, and a series of radical political and social changes. The dismantling of the old feudal order and the introduction of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1789 represented a bold assertion of individual rights and popular sovereignty. The legal and political frameworks that emerged during this period aimed to establish a more egalitarian society, though these lofty ideals were often difficult to implement in practice. The revolution also laid the groundwork for the secularization of France, challenging the power of the Catholic Church, and establishing the principle of the separation of church and state. However, the revolutionary government's excesses, especially during the Reign of Terror, demonstrated the dangers of unchecked political power, with thousands of people executed in the name of defending the revolution. The rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, who took power in the wake of the revolution, marked a significant chapter in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Napoleon's reign, while authoritarian, did maintain some of the revolution's key achievements. For instance, the Napoleonic Code, which he implemented, codified legal equality and protected property rights. Napoleon also spread revolutionary ideals across Europe through his military conquests, overthrowing monarchies and introducing legal and administrative reforms in the territories he controlled. However, Napoleon's decision to crown himself Emperor of the French in 1804 was a stark contradiction to the revolutionary principles of republicanism and popular sovereignty. Despite this, his rule helped consolidate many of the political and social changes initiated by the revolution. Beyond France, the revolution had a profound impact on Europe and the world. Revolutionary ideas inspired uprisings and political movements in other European countries, including in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy, as well as in Latin America. These movements were fueled by the desire for more democratic systems and the inspiration drawn from the ideals of the French Revolution. In particular, the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791, was directly influenced by the principles of liberty and equality espoused by the French Revolution. Led by enslaved Africans, the Haitian Revolution was the first successful slave rebellion in history, resulting in the establishment of the first independent black republic. This revolution not only challenged the institution of slavery but also provided a powerful example of how revolutionary ideals could overthrow entrenched systems of racial and social hierarchy. However, the French Revolution also led to significant backlash from monarchies across Europe. Fearing the spread of revolutionary ideals and the potential for uprisings within their own borders, conservative European monarchs, including those in Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain, formed coalitions to oppose France. The French Revolutionary Wars, fought between France and these monarchies, became a defining feature of the revolutionary period, and despite France's eventual military victories, the wars left the country politically and economically weakened. Moreover, the rise of nationalism, a key byproduct of the revolution, would fuel further conflicts and changes across Europe in the 19th century. The French Revolution also shaped the future of political thought. While the revolution's radical excesses and internal strife cast a shadow over its achievements, it helped to lay the intellectual and ideological groundwork for the rise of modern democratic principles. The revolution inspired the development of political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, and republicanism, which would go on to shape political movements throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Even though the revolution did not achieve all of its goals, it nonetheless altered the course of history, giving rise to a new political order in which the idea of popular sovereignty became central. The revolution's core principles of equality, individual rights, and democratic participation continue to inform modern political systems around the world. The long-term impact of the French Revolution is evident in the continuing global struggles for democracy and human rights. Although France would go through several more phases of political upheaval, the ideals of the revolution became foundational for future democratic movements. In countries that have experienced revolutions and struggles for independence, the influence of the French Revolution is often cited as a source of inspiration. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, in particular, laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of human rights and the rule of law. Ultimately, the French Revolution was both a radical rupture from the past and a complex process that set in motion the development of modern political and social systems. Its legacy is not without contradictions, as it both advanced the cause of liberty and democracy while also descending into violence and authoritarianism. However, the revolution's central ideas, liberty, equality, and fraternity, have endured, continuing to inspire movements for freedom, justice, and equality worldwide. The French Revolution may have ended in Napoleon's rise to power, but its influence on the world, and its lessons about the fragility of democracy, remain relevant to this day. The French Revolution's long-lasting impact on Europe and the world cannot be overstated. It profoundly altered not only France's political and social structures but also influenced global movements for democracy, independence, and the expansion of human rights. One of the most important consequences of the revolution was the dissemination of the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These ideals, though not fully realized in the short term, laid the groundwork for the development of modern democratic governments and legal systems, leaving an indelible mark on political philosophy and the course of world history. Internally, the revolution shifted the balance of power in France, creating new opportunities for political participation and a more egalitarian society, at least in theory. The abolition of the monarchy and the introduction of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen created the framework for individual rights and popular sovereignty. However, the practical realization of these principles faced significant challenges. The rise of radical factions, such as the Jacobins, and the onset of the Reign of Terror created an environment of fear and violence, leading to mass executions and political purges. Despite this, the revolution fundamentally altered the structure of French society by dismantling feudal privileges, secularizing the government, and providing the foundation for future constitutional reforms. After the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Reign of Terror, the revolution entered a more moderate phase, marked by the rise of the Directory, which faced both internal corruption and external threats. The Directory's inability to stabilize the country paved the way for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. While Napoleon's authoritarian rule appeared to contradict the revolution's democratic ideals, he did preserve and even institutionalize many of the revolutionary changes. His implementation of the Napoleonic Code, which emphasized legal equality and individual rights, became a cornerstone of modern legal systems and contributed to the development of civil law codes throughout the world. Yet, Napoleon's decision to crown himself emperor in 1804 demonstrated the contradictions within the revolution itself. It sought to establish a republic of equals, but in many ways, it culminated in the concentration of power in the hands of one man. Napoleon's conquests also played a critical role in spreading revolutionary ideals across Europe. As he expanded his empire, he abolished feudal systems, promoted legal reforms, and sought to implement principles of equality in the regions he controlled. However, his rise to power also sparked fear among other European monarchies, leading to the formation of coalitions that sought to defeat France. The resulting wars, known as the Napoleonic Wars, had a lasting impact on Europe, redrawing borders and influencing the development of nationalism. The collapse of Napoleon's empire in 1815 after his defeat at Waterloo marked the end of the revolutionary era in France but not the end of its influence on Europe. In the wake of the French Revolution, many of the revolutionary ideals it propagated continued to resonate in European and global politics. The upheaval in France inspired independence movements, particularly in Latin America, where revolutionary leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín sought to overthrow colonial powers and establish republics based on the ideals of liberty and equality. The Haitian Revolution, influenced directly by the French Revolution, resulted in the first independent Black republic, further demonstrating how revolutionary ideals could transcend national and racial boundaries. The French Revolution also provided the intellectual foundation for modern political ideologies. The principles of republicanism, individual rights, and the separation of powers that emerged from the revolution influenced the development of liberal, socialist, and democratic thought. Although the revolution did not lead to immediate stability or equality, it ignited a broader conversation about governance and individual freedoms that would shape political debates in the 19th and 20th centuries. Movements for women's rights, civil rights, and workers' rights all drew inspiration from the revolution's principles, seeking to expand the vision of equality to all people, regardless of gender, race, or social class. The revolution's global impact also extended to the concept of human rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen served as a prototype for other human rights documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948. By asserting that all men are born free and equal in rights, the French Revolution laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of human dignity and justice. This document, along with the revolutionary ideals that inspired it, continues to serve as a guiding principle for human rights movements worldwide. In conclusion, the French Revolution was one of the most transformative events in modern history. While it faced significant contradictions and its outcomes were often turbulent, its legacy is undeniable. It reshaped not only France but also the world by challenging the old order of monarchy and aristocracy, spreading ideals of liberty and equality, and inspiring generations of revolutionaries, reformers, and thinkers. The revolution's impact continues to be felt in contemporary political systems, in ongoing struggles for democracy and human rights, and in the global push for equality and justice. The French Revolution may have ended with the rise of Napoleon and the eventual restoration of monarchy in France, but its revolutionary ideals lived on, influencing the course of history and shaping the world as we know it today. The French Revolution not only reshaped France but also left an indelible mark on global politics, society, and thought. While the revolution itself went through various phases, from radical violence to more moderate periods, its long-term effects can be seen in the development of democratic systems, the abolition of monarchies, and the rise of nationalism. The revolution marked the end of an old world order and laid the foundations for modern political ideologies, rights, and institutions that would shape the 19th and 20th centuries. In France, the revolution abolished the monarchy and the feudal system, replacing the old hierarchical social structure with the ideals of equality and popular sovereignty. This shift did not come without immense struggle, with periods of political instability, violence, and the radicalization of revolutionaries. The fall of King Louis XVI and the execution of the royal family symbolized the end of divine right monarchy, while the formation of the First French Republic demonstrated a new political paradigm based on the idea that power rested with the people, not the crown. The revolution's radical phase, marked by the Reign of Terror under Robespierre, set a precedent for the use of mass executions in the name of political ideology. Though the terror led to widespread fear and the eventual fall of the Jacobin government, it reinforced the notion that radical change sometimes required extreme measures. The revolution's ultimate failure to stabilize the country led to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who, despite maintaining some revolutionary reforms, ultimately crowned himself emperor, signaling a shift from republican ideals to centralized autocratic rule. Nevertheless, Napoleon's reign had a lasting impact on Europe and the world. His conquest spread revolutionary principles across the continent, even as his empire was built on the foundation of military force and political control. Napoleon's establishment of the Napoleonic Code became one of his most enduring legacies, institutionalizing equality before the law, the protection of property rights, and legal reforms that would influence legal systems around the world. Despite his eventual downfall in 1815, Napoleon's influence on legal and political reforms, along with his military campaigns, reshaped the map of Europe and led to the spread of nationalist movements. The French Revolution also had a profound impact on the world, particularly in the Americas. The ideals of liberty and equality inspired independence movements across Latin America. Figures like Simón Bolívar, who sought to free Latin America from Spanish colonial rule, and the leaders of the Haitian Revolution, which resulted in the first independent Black Republic, were directly influenced by the events in France. The Haitian Revolution, in particular, not only overturned French colonial rule but also abolished slavery, marking a significant moment in the global history of human rights. The revolution's effects were not limited to political revolutions. It also contributed to the development of modern ideologies. The French Revolution's emphasis on individual rights, republicanism, and popular sovereignty influenced the rise of liberal, socialist, and nationalist movements throughout the 19th century. Its ideals provided the basis for movements advocating for universal suffrage, civil rights, and the expansion of democracy. The French Revolution's legacy can be seen in the revolutions of 1848, the spread of nationalism across Europe, and the eventual formation of the modern welfare state. At the same time, the revolution gave birth to a new form of secularism. The Roman Catholic Church, which had long held immense power in France, was subjected to reforms that limited its influence. The revolution's secular nature led to the confiscation of church property, the abolition of religious privileges, and the promotion of a secular state, setting a precedent for the separation of church and state in the modern world. On the international stage, the French Revolution also played a critical role in the development of international law and human rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen *, adopted by the National Assembly in 1789, was a groundbreaking document that proclaimed the inalienable rights of individuals and became a model for later human rights declarations, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The document set forth the principles of freedom, equality, and fraternity and established the idea that governments should be held accountable for protecting the rights of citizens. Despite the revolution's tumultuous and often violent course, its influence on modern political thought is profound. It challenged the old order and provided the foundation for the rise of democracy, equality before the law, and the protection of individual rights. In France, while the revolution did not immediately bring lasting peace and stability, it set in motion a process that would lead to the establishment of the French Republic and the eventual expansion of democratic rights across Europe and beyond. The French Revolution's most significant contribution was its insistence on the possibility of radical change. It demonstrated that a nation's political and social structures could be fundamentally transformed by the people, setting an example that would inspire future generations to challenge oppressive regimes and seek justice. While the revolution's legacy was fraught with contradictions and challenges, its ideas continued to shape the political landscape, driving movements for democracy, human rights, and equality across the globe. The French Revolution, though it faced many setbacks and contradictions, proved that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. The revolution's legacy continues to be felt today, in the ongoing struggles for political, social, and economic justice around the world. The French Revolution's legacy is a defining moment in world history, marking the transition from absolute monarchy and feudalism to modern democracy, republicanism, and human rights. The profound social, political, and cultural changes that unfolded during the revolution reshaped not just France, but Europe and the rest of the world. While the revolution's immediate outcomes were marked by violence, instability, and the rise of authoritarianism, its enduring impact lies in the foundational principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity that continue to inspire global political movements to this day. The revolution's transformation of France was dramatic and far-reaching. The monarchy, which had ruled France for centuries, was dismantled, and the French people took control of their government, establishing the First French Republic. The ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, became the rallying cry for a new political order. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted in 1789, was a key document that enshrined the principles of equality and individual rights, laying the groundwork for the modern understanding of human rights. These revolutionary ideals would go on to influence democratic movements across the globe, from the Americas to Europe and beyond. Despite the lofty goals of the revolution, the path to achieving them was far from straightforward. The early stages of the revolution were marked by significant upheaval and violence, particularly during the Reign of Terror, when the revolutionary government executed thousands in an effort to root out perceived enemies of the revolution. The rise of radical figures like Robespierre and the Jacobins led to a climate of fear, where political opponents and even former revolutionaries were put to death. The Reign of Terror, though successful in consolidating revolutionary power, ultimately led to the downfall of Robespierre and his supporters, and the subsequent Thermidorian reaction ushered in a more moderate phase of the revolution. The eventual rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who capitalized on the chaos of the revolution, marked the end of the revolutionary era. Napoleon's ascent to power as first consul in 1799, and later as Emperor of the French, represented a shift from the republican ideals of the Revolution to autocratic rule. Despite this, Napoleon preserved many of the Revolution's reforms, including the Napoleonic Code, which laid the foundation for modern legal systems in France and beyond. Napoleon's conquest spread revolutionary ideals throughout Europe, though his military campaigns also led to widespread destruction and the eventual collapse of his empire. Nevertheless, his rule helped solidify many of the political changes initiated by the Revolution, and his legacy shaped the political landscape of Europe for years to come. The influence of the French Revolution extended far beyond Europe. In the Americas, the Revolution inspired independence movements throughout the continent. The Haitian Revolution, which occurred in the midst of the French Revolution, was particularly significant. Led by enslaved people, the Haitian Revolution resulted in the establishment of the first independent Black republic and the abolition of slavery, marking a pivotal moment in the history of human rights. The revolution's ideals also inspired movements for independence in Latin America, where figures like Simón Bolívar sought to overthrow colonial powers and establish republics based on the principles of liberty and equality. In Europe, the French Revolution sparked nationalist movements that sought to unify fragmented states and challenge existing monarchies. The rise of nationalism, influenced by revolutionary ideals, contributed to the unification of Germany and Italy in the 19th century, as well as to the broader struggle for national self-determination. The ideas of the revolution also shaped the development of political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, and republicanism, which would go on to influence political movements in the 19th and 20th centuries. The French Revolution also had a significant impact on the development of modern political philosophy and the concept of human rights. The principles articulated in the * Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen provided a foundation for later human rights documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the United Nations in 1948. The revolution's emphasis on the sovereignty of the people, individual freedoms, and equality before the law would continue to shape global political thought and the pursuit of democracy and justice throughout the modern era. While the revolution's immediate aftermath was marked by political instability, the rise of Napoleon, and the eventual restoration of the monarchy, its ideas endured. The French Revolution demonstrated that it was possible to overthrow an entrenched system and reshape a nation's political and social structures. Its legacy is evident in the continued global struggle for democracy, equality, and human rights. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity have become cornerstones of modern democratic systems, and the revolution's lessons about the dangers of political extremism, the importance of civic participation, and the protection of individual rights continue to inform contemporary political debates. In conclusion, the French Revolution was a turning point in history that reshaped the political, social, and cultural landscape of the world. Its impact was felt not only in France but across Europe and the globe, inspiring movements for independence, human rights, and democracy. While the revolution faced contradictions, challenges, and violent excesses, its legacy is undeniable. It laid the groundwork for modern political systems based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and its influence continues to shape the world today. The French Revolution was not just a historical event. It was a transformative moment that changed the course of history and provided the foundation for the democratic values that continue to guide societies around the world. The French Revolution, despite its tumultuous and often violent nature, sparked significant long-term changes not just in France but across Europe and the wider world. It paved the way for modern concepts of citizenship, individual rights, and democratic government. In addition to the immediate political shifts, the revolution's ideological impact shaped the trajectory of political thought, legal systems, and national identities across the globe. One of the most enduring effects of the French Revolution was the assertion of human rights and the concept of popular sovereignty. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen laid out the revolutionary principles that men are born and remain free and equal in rights, framing the pursuit of liberty, equality, and fraternity as central to the future of democratic societies. This document not only served as a model for future revolutionary movements but also inspired the formation of human rights charters and declarations across the globe. It fundamentally challenged monarchies, feudal systems, and the inequality inherent in class-based societies, which had dominated Europe for centuries. The radical rethinking of governance structures that emerged during the Revolution deeply influenced the development of republics, particularly in Europe and the Americas. The very idea that a nation's sovereignty should lie with its people rather than with a hereditary monarch challenged the foundations of monarchical rule. As the revolutionary fervor spread, various European nations, and later former colonies, adopted republican ideals or sought to reform their monarchies in the face of growing demands for political representation and rights. The French Revolution, in this way, played a key role in the rise of modern democracy. The revolution also led to the secularization of society, particularly in France. With the Catholic Church being a powerful institution deeply integrated into both political and social life, the revolution's radical secular reforms were an affront to the religious establishment. The revolutionaries not only confiscated church property but also pursued policies aimed at reducing the church's political influence, such as the civil constitution of the clergy. This shift away from religious authority and the church's involvement in governance paved the way for the rise of secular politics in the modern world, setting a precedent for the separation of church and state in democratic societies. In the realm of law, the French Revolution made lasting contributions with the creation of the Napoleonic Code. While Napoleon's regime shifted from the revolutionary ideal of a republic to a centralized empire, he retained and codified many of the reforms instituted during the Revolution. The Napoleonic Code, adopted in 1804, codified laws on property, family, and civil rights, ensuring equality before the law and securing the rights of individuals, principles that continue to influence legal systems around the world. Napoleon's rule may have been authoritarian, but the legal reforms he implemented carried the revolutionary ideals of equality and liberty far beyond France's borders. Napoleon's influence extended beyond legal reforms. His military campaigns spread the revolution's principles across Europe. Through both force and diplomacy, Napoleon dismantled the old monarchical order and established client states that adopted revolutionary reforms. While Napoleon's empire eventually collapsed after his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, the changes he introduced left a lasting impact on European politics, helping to bring about the end of feudalism and the consolidation of many modern nation-states. Globally, the French Revolution inspired movements for independence and democratic reforms. The Haitian Revolution, which occurred in parallel with the French Revolution, was one of the most significant of these. Enslaved people in the French colony of Saint-Domingue rose up, driven by the same revolutionary ideals that were sweeping France, and ultimately established the first independent Black Republic in 1804. The Haitian Revolution not only abolished slavery but also forced European powers to reckon with the potential for revolution in their own colonies. Similarly, revolutionary leaders in Latin America, such as Simón Bolívar, drew directly from the French Revolution in their struggles for independence from Spanish rule. The French Revolution also had profound consequences for nationalism, which would become a dominant force in the 19th century. The idea of the nation-state, where sovereignty lies with the people of a specific geographic area, gained ground as a result of the revolution. Nationalism, as an outgrowth of the revolution's emphasis on popular sovereignty and the unity of citizens around shared values, fueled independence movements in Italy, Germany, and Greece. It also influenced the growth of national identities in formerly colonial regions of Asia and Africa in the 20th century. Although the French Revolution led to many internal contradictions, including the rise of Napoleon as emperor and the violence of the Reign of Terror, its ideals shaped the development of modern political systems and social structures. Its legacy continues to influence debates on democracy, human rights, and equality today. The revolution marked the birth of the modern concept of citizenship, emphasizing the rights and responsibilities of individuals within the state. It was a pivotal moment that not only redefined France but also set the stage for the political transformations that followed across the globe, inspiring people to question authority and demand their rights as citizens of a republic. In conclusion, the French Revolution was one of the most transformative events in world history. Despite the complexities and contradictions of its outcomes, the revolution's ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity endured. The revolution's impact can be seen in the ongoing struggles for democracy, human rights, and social justice around the world. It fundamentally challenged the existing political and social order, replacing it with the principles of republicanism and the rights of individuals. The French Revolution may have ended in the rise of Napoleon and the eventual restoration of the monarchy, but its legacy continues to influence the world today, shaping the path toward democracy and human rights for future generations.